Welcome back to Lush Life No Labels. I'm Michelle. Let's dive right into our story of the week this week, which is actually around learning and language. Have you ever had to learn a new language? In the US, many high schools have a language requirement. And when I was in high school, a lot of my friends took Spanish, which makes the most sense if you're in the US, given that there are many Spanish speakers. I know some people who took Mandarin, German. I actually took French because French is a language that I actually learned and spoke before I learned English. So, fun fact about me, English was my fourth language. My first language is Malinke. In my language, I actually say Maninkakan. This is my tribal language from Guinea in West Africa. My second language is another tribe's language called Susu. And then my third was French because my country was a French colony and we got our independence. Actually, we demanded our independence in 1958. And then when I moved to America, that's when I learned English. So I'm someone who has a lot of experience learning languages. It's not a foreign thing for me. And actually, where I'm from, knowing multiple languages is pretty common. Everyone speaks at least three languages. And my dad actually spoke seven from what I remember. So he may have spoken more, I don't know. But I was talking to a friend this week about how I learned English because I've been trying to improve my French after living in America for the majority of my life at this point. I know that I'm capable of doing it, but as I get older, it just seems so much harder. So that's what I want to talk about today. Learning languages, but more broadly, learning things as an adult. Like I said, I've been trying to improve on my French after living in the US for so long. And it's funny because I actually teach other people English as a second language. So I'm very familiar with adults trying to learn or improve on a language that is not their native language. It's not that I don't speak French. I actually understand it and I can read it. So it's really not the biggest issue. My biggest issue actually is me and my lack of confidence in speaking. So I want to use this concept of learning a language to drive this episode. But like I said, this can really be applied to learning any skill as an adult. Maybe you used to play a sport like tennis in high school and want to get back to it, or you want to try a new style of dance. It really could be anything. It could even be you've been out of school for a few years and you are getting ready to go back to grad school after not having been in a classroom setting for a while. I find that these different things can be a bit more difficult for adults than it would be for a kid who is learning it for the first time. There are a few advantages of learning for kids and why it's easier for them. One, kids' brains are more elastic and adaptable. So it's easier for them to absorb new information. And that's pretty much what they're doing as they grow up, right? You're learning how to be a human. You're learning what the world is like. You're learning how to be social, what's right, what's wrong. And their brains are in a great position to take all of that in. New information is pretty common for a child, especially through daily interactions that they have, whereas adults may not have the same amount of time. The other thing, too, is that kids are more likely to take risks and make mistakes without the fear of failure that can sometimes hold adults back. I mentioned that I have a lack of confidence right now in speaking French, which I'll elaborate on a little bit later. But a kid wouldn't have that. And I remember when I moved to the US and I was learning English, I had so much excitement, so much, there was so much I needed to learn and I had to learn. And it was much easier for me to learn it, even though I didn't speak the language and other kids did. I felt a little bit self-conscious for sure, because I wanted to know what my classmates were saying and my teacher was saying. But that actually motivated me to learn the language more so that I can participate in the conversations that I wasn't able to participate in. As an adult, though, I find this to be much more difficult because our brains are fully developed at this point and much less adaptable than a kid. We're more self-conscious and we don't want to make mistakes. This is very true for me because, like I said, I know how to speak French. I can understand it for the most part. When others speak, I can read it, but I lack the confidence to speak or respond to others because I think I'll sound unintelligent or sound like I'm speaking in an incomplete way with bad grammar. I'm self-conscious about my accent and how slow I talk as I try to find the words that I'm looking for, which is funny because I do teach adults in English and I tell them all the time, hey, it's important for you to gain the confidence, just talk. It's talking, saying something is better than saying nothing. But I find that I don't follow my own advice when it comes to this, which is on me and is annoying, but it is something that I think other adults probably can relate to as well. If you're getting back into a sport you used to play, I think I said tennis earlier, maybe you haven't played in a long time and you might feel a little nervous getting back on the court. You might need to refresh your memory on how do I do this? What are the rules? Okay, XYZ, those types of things. And so it can be a little hard when you've been out of the game for some time, but I think that's just part of being an adult and being where we are. One time, actually, I did attend a virtual meetup of French speakers, and everyone was talking so fast. I felt intimidated and didn't go to another session. It's and it has nothing to do with the people in that chat. They were very encouraging. They actually asked me questions when I was in there. But again, I just was nervous when I was responding to them because it would take me a little bit more time to find the words than it did them. And I just was a little embarrassed. Again, nobody embarrassed me. I kind of embarrassed myself. And it's just me being self-conscious. I've been surrounded by English speakers now for most of my life, and it's the language that I hear the most. So it's harder for me to think in French like I used to, and it's harder for me to incorporate it into my daily life when everything that I'm doing is related to English speaking people. As an adult, too, I find that we already have fixed language patterns, and it can be difficult to break these patterns. I've spoken English, American English, in a certain way, and that's what I'm used to. So when I speak French, I speak in an English way. Actually, this reminds me because I took a trip back to my home country recently. And I was so excited to go. I was like, oh, I'm going to blend in. I look like everyone here. I speak my native language. I speak French. Like, it's going to be all good. They're not even going to know that I'm foreign. Lies, just lies, I guess, that I told myself. I didn't realize that I apparently speak French with an English accent. And when I was visiting my home country and I was speaking French, people immediately knew that I was not from there in the sense, like they knew I didn't grow up there because they would ask me, oh, where are you from? You sound like you have a foreign accent. You speak like an English speaker who is speaking French. So that was actually the first time I realized, or I guess somebody's told me that I have this accent. None of my family has ever told me this. None of my family friends who I grew up speaking French with never told me this. So now I know that I have an accent. So that's a little fun fact for you there. But it's interesting to have learned that because when I was told that I have an accent, I felt a little called out, and they didn't say that I wasn't speaking well. It was more just my accent, which makes me stand out. It really showed me how far away from it I have been all of these years. As an adult, too, we juggle way more responsibilities, and I find it can be harder to focus than when I was younger and trying to learn all of these languages. We have to think about work, we have to think about our bills, we have to think about so many things as adults and so many responsibilities. And when I try to immerse myself into French, sometimes I get distracted. I'm thinking about other things, thinking in English. And so it can really be hard for me to concentrate on it, whether I'm using an app, whether I'm watching something in French. If my phone goes off, I might look at that and that's in English. So already my mindset has shifted when I'm looking at something like that. So I think it can be really hard when you're living in a country where the majority of people don't speak the language that you're trying to improve on, which again is how my students feel when I am talking to them, and how they feel in general living in the US and having this language barrier. So that lack of immersion makes it more challenging. I'll keep using the tennis example again, right? But if you're someone who used to play tennis and now you're trying to get back into it, and all of your friends and everyone you know, I don't know, plays football or is only interested in football, it can be difficult for you to get back on that saddle. So what do? Maybe you try to join a club sport for tennis so that you have other people who are like-minded who also want to practice what you're practicing. That's what made me go on that virtual meetup. But again, my lack of confidence is kind of what deterred me from going to another session. But if you go to the tennis court and you meet new people and you see that they're really, really good, you might be a little intimidated, even though deep in your mind, you know that you know how to play the sport, you have the muscle memory, but sometimes we just can't help but be a little intimidated. And it's okay to admit that. Especially as adults, it's okay to admit that, you know what, maybe I'm not as good at this as I used to be. Maybe there are little cobwebs in here and I just need to brush up on it. And that's been what's going on with me pretty much with this, the learning aspect. Social media also is something that has impacted my attention span with learning. I talked about getting distractions whenever I try to practice my French. Part of that is actually because of a shortened attention span that I have as an adult compared to when I was a kid, which is funny because we often say that children don't have long attention spans and it's easy for them to get distracted. But as an adult, when you have so much going on and your head is filled with so many things, you can definitely have a shorter attention span. I'm a millennial and social media was essentially started during my era. Being a social media kid is one of the reasons why my attention span is shorter than it used to be, because I'm so used to being online, having all these quick interactions with people, being on TikTok, these quick videos, being on Instagram, just all of these types of things. And so it's harder for me to pay attention and just put my phone away for a little bit while I focus on this other thing that I'm trying to improve on and trying to learn. But again, I haven't been following my own advice when it comes to French that I give to my students. At first, I thought maybe I'm just not as passionate about it as I used to be. Maybe I feel a sense of obligation to study it because it's easier when I visit my home country, or it's easier when I speak to other people who speak French. But being in the US, I haven't felt an immediate need to improve my French because, again, everyone here speaks English. That's part of it too, is that I don't have as much of a motivation to improve on this language like I did when I was a kid. Not to say that any adult who wants to brush up on something doesn't have motivation, but sometimes we may not have as much of that as we used to. I remember my first semester of grad school was a lot. I had not been in school for a long time, even though we're all pretty much in school for what, 12 years, and then we graduate college. So a lot of my life has been spent in the classroom, but I took a few years off to work and then got back to my grad school. And I basically had to relearn how to be a student again. I had to relearn to sit in those classes, listen, do my homework, do group projects, basically do everything that school has to do, read my textbooks, basically relearn a lot of the things that used to come really easy to me, but it just was a refresher that I needed, and just to get back into that classroom mindset. And when I thought about that, I was like, oh, maybe that's what it is for me. Maybe I've been having a challenge. Maybe I've been having this mental block with French because I'm not in the right mindset. So I need to step back and reevaluate what I am trying to do here, because French is not the only thing that I'm trying to relearn. And there are a lot of new things too that I am wanting wanting to learn and wanting to get better at. If I can look at the way that I'm trying to get back into French, then that will definitely help me push forward on some of the other things in my life that I want to try. So, how do you overcome this mental block as you want to learn something? One is to have a growth mindset. That's something that I didn't really have. I just thought, you know what, let me just try to refresh this. But no, I need to step back and say, no, I'm not where I used to be. That's just the first thing to admit, is that I do need help and I do need to reframe this because I do want to grow again in my abilities around this language. I need to reevaluate the way that I learn. Maybe the way that I learned French before or English before or any of the other languages that I know, maybe that's just not the way that my brain works now. Maybe there's a different and a better way for me to learn now with what I have. The other thing I've thought about too is definitely getting back to those online chats. That would be helpful. I think getting over some of the embarrassment is going to be one of the things that will help me the most. I tell my students all the time about that. Even though you're an adult and you might be embarrassed about your ability to speak or your ability to communicate, it's okay, especially when you surround yourself with people who are doing that same thing, or with people who are just willing to help you out. People are actually willing to help out more in those situations because they're like, oh, let me help you. I can get more practice out of this by helping you as well. So finding a community is going to be one of the things that I need to do in order to get back into it. Another thing too that I want to do is actively read in French. What I always say to my students is obviously the immersion, the interaction with people who speak the language will help you the most. Simply reading and writing is not going to help you learn a language, but it will definitely further that because you start recognizing words more often. You can see the sentence structures there. So that's another thing too that I want to do. But overall, staying consistent is going to be the key thing. Stay consistent, consistency over perfection, because part of the reason why I've hesitated to relearn this is that it's not perfect right now. But you know what? It doesn't need to be. As long as I can communicate in this language and I can learn those new skills, that is what is most important, not whether or not I have the most perfect native French ever. That is definitely the least of my worries at this point. Like I said, I do have a few things that I am challenging myself to do in order for me to refresh my memory on French. And it might seem small, but I'm going to pick an area to start and just tackle that. Just tackle an area that I am not confident in. For you, as a listener, maybe you're trying to get into drawing or painting, something else that I'm not very good at, but I've done before. And I encourage you to have an open mind. Also, remember that it may not be as easy as it was when you did it before. It's like riding a bike. Also, I don't know how to ride a bike. Nobody ever taught me. That's a story for another time. But what I've heard is that, let's say you learned to ride a bike when you were younger, but you've gone years without riding a bike and you get back onto it. It just takes a little bit for you to get back into it. Maybe you're a little wobbly at the beginning. Maybe you fall over once or twice, but eventually that muscle memory will kick in again and you're going to be right back into it. Literally last week, I went ice skating for the first time. And even though I was surrounded by children and young adults who aren't scared of falling, I braved my way through it. Those kids were looking at me since I was clinging on to the side of the rail because I was afraid I would fall. I was holding on to the people, the organizers, the people there basically who get you and can catch you if you fall. I was holding on to their hands, and I'm sure I looked a little bit ridiculous, but you know what? I had a good time and I saw it as the start of something new. So even though it was something that I had never done before, even though it was something that could have been easier had I been younger, I wouldn't have been afraid to fall as much. I'm so glad that I did it. And I just took it with stride. I was like, you know what? If I fall, it is what it is. First of all, these people don't even know me, so whatever. But also, it was just took the effort and the time to get all the way over there to pay to actually get those skates. So I was not about to leave due to my fear of falling or due to my fear of looking a little crazy on the side. And I want to encourage my listeners to do the same. Okay. It's okay if you're going to look a little crazy. Maybe you'll be a little embarrassed. Maybe you'll fall on the ice. Maybe you'll fall on the bike. Maybe I'm going to speak in broken French during my virtual meeting. But that's okay because that is one step closer to me reaching that goal and one step closer to me relearning something that one that I used to be really good at, but also just something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy talking in different languages. Like I said, y'all, like speaking in multiple languages runs in my family. It's a thing that I take pride in. And I also consider myself a lifelong learner. Even if something is hard to learn, one thing I know about me is that I'm a smart cookie and I can do it if I put my mind to it. All I need to do is recognize that the pace will be slower, but it's all good. It is all good. And I'm actually excited that I talked about this on this podcast because I haven't really told anybody about my nervousness around this. And I will hopefully keep myself accountable through doing things like this. But honestly, that's the beauty of life. It doesn't matter how much older we get, there's still opportunities for us to learn new things, to refresh our memory on old things, and just to see where else life takes us. So if you consider yourself a lifelong learner, I encourage you to join me in my quest and let me know in the comments if there's something that you have wanted to get back to or something that you wanted to start that you've been a little nervous about as an adult. Let me know what it is, and I hope we can encourage each other to keep going and to not give up on these new ventures of ours. So I'll leave you with this. Is there something you've been wanting to learn or refresh but have encountered a mental block? If so, what's one thing you can do to take a step closer to your goal? Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe to my podcast and tune in next week for more. Bye bye.